everyone. In this presentation, we'll be talking about how you can embed rules and expressions in your apps to empower your users. A little bit about me. I'm Matthew Mathieson. I've been with InsightWorks for 7 years now. I mostly work within the shipping space, and I provide onboarding and mentorship for our new developers. Now in this session, we're going to talk about what the expression evaluator is, what the rule builder is, how we use those in our products, and we're going to go through some example projects on how you can leverage them. If you want to follow along, there's some basic skills that are required. You have to know VS Code, you have to have technical knowledge for AL and development, and you have to have some understanding of Git. Now you don't have to follow along, you can just get the completed project and use that as an example basis. Now for the InsightWorks Rule Builder, this app is available on SaaS. It's free, there's no licensing requirements, you just have to install it. The caveat is that this app is not listed on App Source. So you either get it installed by installing a dependent application like the Enhanced Planning Pack or the Product Configurator or Quality Inspector and so on, or you can simply use the direct install URL for Business Central. In that URL, you'll notice there is a tenant ID placeholder, and that placeholder will need to be populated with whichever tenant you're intending to install this to. Once it's installed, you can create your dependency in your app, download the symbols, and get going. So the expression evaluator. This is one of the components within the Rule Builder app, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a calculator. It's just a powerful calculator. Instead of doing just basic operations, it can do formulas, expression, Boolean logic, variables, whatever you kind of need. Certain things are built in like pi and other mathematical constants and other math functions like sin and tan and cos. That is all built in. It uses an Excel style formula with a semicolon. I point that out because in North America, typically we would use a comma, but for this to function region independent, we're always using a semicolon. Now, the way we use the expression evaluator, as an example, is within Quality Inspector. It's used for numeric expression test fields. These get created when you create your quality inspection template. Another example is that the Enhanced Planning Pack actually makes use of them within forecasting and planning. Now, as I mentioned, you can use variables and functions. And if you look at the knowledge base article that the QR code leads you to, you can actually see that the apps that make use of the expression evaluator will often have their own custom variables that you can use within those apps because they can be added context sensitively from the data set that you're using. Now, to get to our first example, I will start off in Business Central and just kind of show you what the base of it looks like. It's going to open up the page, and this is it. This is going to be the example project, essentially just building a calculator. Now, right now we haven't implemented much. All we're doing is kind of feeding back whatever's been entered and then showing the result while, at the current implementation stage, we're not getting a result. We aren't using the expression evaluator yet. So as you can tell, it's going to be a very simple example project. The only things to keep in mind is this input that I'm putting in can really come from anywhere. This can be some sort of configuration. This can be a value within a field. This can be an expression you build up dynamically by using different value fields, and so on. And you'll see how you can do that through this example. So first off, I'm just at step 1 in the Git graph, and we're just going to have a peek at the basic structure that we've created here. The table is not very interesting. It is essentially just those 3 fields. We're not going to change the table, so we're not going to worry about looking at that again. And then in the page, very simple page, the entire content, and the only thing that really matters is the validate on our entry field. Everything else, just for visibility. Now what we're doing in the validate right now is just the basics of that page, right? We're trimming our input, we're not running empty inputs, we're adding them to the view that we see, but we don't have anything yet to calculate the view or calculate the result. So let's jump to the next step. I'll go back to our page and we'll see we've added something. We've added the expression evaluator code unit. This code unit is going to do everything you need it to do as far as expression evaluator goes. In this first step, or I guess technically step 2, all we're doing is just throwing back whatever we get into our expressions and using that, right? Now, the expression evaluator can do simple math, but it can also do formulas like ifs greater than evaluations, and it has certain preset available terminology like pi and sin and cos and all those kind of things, and you can use those. Just go look at the knowledge base article and it will tell you everything that's available. But for now, we're just going to run with this one that just has the defaults. So let's open our expression evaluator again. And now this time I'll do another 1 plus 1, and we can see we've got the result of 2. And if I do something a little bit more, actually I don't need the, let's do, let's do 2 plus pi. We can see we get a result there, and then right away we found a symbol that's already defined within the product. So there's certain things that are going to be accessible as far as like basic math functionality, but there are also expression capabilities, right? So I can do, let's start with greater than 1 and 0, and what I'll get as a result is a 1 because 1 is greater than 0. It's always going to return a 1 or 0. Maybe using these numbers wasn't the best, so I change this just so it's clear, right? I'm comparing if 5 is greater than 3, and if it is, I'm getting a 1 in the result. And I can use that and chain that together with more expressions. So now I can say an if, and I can say, hey, if 5 is greater than 3, then I want the value to be 10, otherwise it should be 20. And I get the result 10. And you can chain this really, really large. It's only going to be limited by whatever your text field limit is. And that's pretty much it. And this right now may seem like, okay, we've got a bunch of constant numbers in here. What's the point of that? But if you think back to how I used pi, those same kind of constants and variables can be defined by you in the extension. So I'll go back to Git graph and I will check out the next step. And now if we're going back, we'll see that that's exactly what I'm doing. In the open page, I'm adding 3 variables. Now in this case, I'm just adding these as constant variables. They're not dynamically set. They're just quantity is going to be 5, max quantity is going to be 10, and TechWorks is going to be 2024. What you'll do most of the time is get these values from some sort of data set. Let's say the sales line, purchase line, item table, what have you. One of the things you can do that's kind of available is if I use this expression evaluator and I say add, there's also add numeric fields as variables. So if you look at what that input is, it takes a variant, returns a list of text. Essentially, if I pass in a sales line record, it's going to add the quantity, quantity shipped, quantity to invoice, quantity based, all those numeric fields, discount, etc., to your variables, and then those would be available to dynamically use, right? So if you do something like that, suddenly you have all those values available for your sales line. I'm not done that in this example, so we're not going to change anything there. As you can see, like no special extra variables or anything, it is all that same code unit. Running this again, going back to our expression evaluator. Now I have my variables, all right? So those are just very directly accessible. So now I can say, you know, if the quantity, if the max quantity is less than the quantity. What do I want to do? Wrap this in another if. If max quantity is less than quantity, then I want to make sure I use quantity. Otherwise, I can use max quantity or something like that. And now I can see, oh, this results in a 10. Oh, I did it the wrong way around. That's okay, because that's going to evaluate to true. So it should really be the other way. So that's just going to result in using that data set to dynamically evaluate other things. So these are very simple examples, right? But think about it in the context of someone is entering a sales order and they're entering a quantity of 10. Right now in Business Central, you're just going to get this message, hey, we don't have enough quantity, right? Everyone has seen that message. If you want to make that a little bit more dynamic, you can now use the expression evaluator, and if someone enters a 10, you can automatically set the quantity to ship to the maximum available. Or maybe you automatically update the quantity, right? You can do a lot more complicated processing and logic. You could also, in the same sense, use this to determine a discount and say, you know, if so greater than, if the quantity was greater than max quantity, then I could give back a discount value and say, okay, discount value should be 10, otherwise it's going to be a 0, and I check that and it's going to be a 0 in this case. And if I update my constants for quantity, because it's going to be dynamic from a record, now I can use that to determine what other fields should be. Now obviously you could do all of this quite easily just through regular code. The difference with the expression evaluator is you can use this obviously within your code, but you can also make this configurable for your user. So right now we just have a text box, but you could imagine a scenario where you have a configuration field and you just put discount and then have a formula that you use to determine that discount based on other fields that are available in the sales line. Now, that's going to be a lot of manual building to kind of use that expression, but it's entirely possible, right? So let's talk about the next things you can do, right? Right now we've got the if, we've got the greater than, we have some functionality, but a lot of the time you're going to want to add your own functionality. So if we go back and we check out the next step, what we're going to see is, well, nothing really has changed on the page. We've added this lookup table because what we're going to do is add our own custom function. And to do the own custom function, we're going to have a code unit. So in the code unit, what we're going to do is keyword to the word lookup. So anyone that's used Excel knows lookups are used a lot in Excel to check the data from other cells, right? You could very similar use that same process within Business Central, specifically within the expression evaluator, right? So in this case, what I'm doing here is I'm just always assuming that my lookup is going to succeed, which is not exactly a code safe approach, but all I'm doing is saying, hey, I've got a lookup that's going to give me a single parameter, and that parameter is going to look up a value in my custom table, and that's going to be returned. So now we're going to run back into our expression evaluator one more time. And this time what we're going to do is first look at our lookup table. Now what I'm going to do is just add a bunch of entries. What these numbers are doesn't really matter. And then I'll add another one that's just 100, and I'll put this in entry 100. Right, so this could be anything. This could be GL entry, reservation entries, whatever you need to perform the lookup, you kind of can do. All you have to consider is that for the most part, it's very text focused, but if you use your event subscriber and overwrite the event, or it's more number focused, but you use the event subscriber and you use you override your specific functionality, you can really make it behave how you want. So now I have these entries, 1 for 8 and 100. So I can start grabbing some entry. I can also start using this now in additional formulas, right? So if greater than lookup 3, if lookup 3 is greater than quantity, then what? Then I want the value to be 8. Otherwise, I want it to be 11. Right? And what was lookup 3? 345. That's going to be larger than our constant of 5. So now when you think about it, okay, so before we could enter an expression to determine a discount, now we can also add a secondary lookup table that defines levels of discount. So if you use like the total price of a line and you compare it to a certain lookup quantity, you can kind of determine where should that discount kind of fall, right? And now, obviously, like I said, I wrote the code in an unsafe fashion. So if I do a lookup 11, I'm going to just get an error because there's nothing in the table there. So you do have to potentially account for those situations when you are working with the expression evaluator and adding custom functions. That is pretty much it for the expression evaluator. You can get the entire code sample off of our repositories. It's freely accessible. Use it as you want. Use it as an example to kind of guide you through how you can implement it yourself. Thank you. Now for the second component within the rule builder, the rule builder itself. The rule builder itself is kind of built on the expression evaluator, but consider that the expression evaluator always gives you a numeric result. The rule builder can do much, much more. It can do numeric, it can do text, it can do user inputs, it can do prompts, it can update values, it can, beyond that, even just do whatever else kind of logic you want it to do. It is a very, very powerful tool. Now, this knowledge base article will kind of lead you to how we use it in the product configurator, because that is really where it gets used to its fullest extent. In the product configurator, you'll see how when you configure the item categories to limit how bombs can be built, how the rule builder plays into that. Now, you've probably seen a demo at some point where there's a base bomb for a bicycle, and if a bell gets added, you can't add a second bell. If the bicycle is red, you can't add white tires, and so on and so on. And you can use the rule builder to create all of those limits as far as how your bombs can be assembled. That part's really powerful because it lets you to have one master bomb that you can really limit on how the build goes, so you don't end up with salespeople entering invalid configurations, and it allows you to create those assemblies on the fly instead of having someone put in all the potential options right ahead of time. Now, the way the rule builder works generally is that you're going to feed in a data set and whatever options you want available for the user to select from, or actions that they should be allowed to do. And then the user can build up a rule that combines and contrasts these conditions and then has some sort of output action from it. Now, in the demo, we're going to be building some rules on top of a fabricated data set just for the initial simplicity. And then at the end, we're going to use sales lines as a data set to see that it can get quite a bit more complicated. Now we'll move on to the demo section for this. So in this right now, just to show you what we have kind of as the first example, this is our data set, right? This is the fabricated data set, and it's nothing special. There's just a few lines of data in here. There are some actions to edit the rules, run the rules, view the rules, but they're not doing anything right now because we haven't implemented that yet, right? So first things first, let's look at what the base of this project kind of looks like. if we look, we have our table. You can probably guess that these fields are kind of related to the sales line, right? So it makes sense, but we're not going to change the table past that. Then we have our page that, again, just reflects that page, that data set, and then has the actions. I already have an action in here to view all the rules, but we're not going to worry about that right now because that's not as important. One thing that is important is, where's our enum? Is the enum. What we're doing here is extending the enum that is available in the rule builder to add our own. So I just chose this TechWorks enum, but it can be anything you want. You're not limited to adding just one. You can add multiple. If you're building a project that covers multiple areas, like say sales line, purchase lines, assemblies, feel free to make its own enum value for each of those sections. In this case, I'm just going to use one so I can show how you can actually subdivide that enum further if you need subclassifications. And then past that, all we have right now is the rule definition list, which is just going to throw back all the rules that are defined in the system at this point for our specific rule. That's all we're going to do with it. Now, this stuff isn't too interesting yet, right? This is just the foundation. So let's go to the next step and check out what we do to edit the rules. Now, unlike the expression evaluator, where we just use the expression evaluator code unit directly, what we're going to do in this section is actually write a wrapper code unit specifically for the rule builder. And that's because the rule builder kind of relies on two components. The component to make your rule, but also the component to execute your rule. So we're going to wrap that into a single code unit to simplify our life a little bit. To do that, I've just got this one single code unit that right now just has some scaffolding specifically to edit the rules. Pretty straightforward. We're going to initialize the rule definitions, which is what variables the user can utilize. Then we're going to get whatever the rule header is for the specific option that we're looking at. And then we're going to run a base rule builder function to edit said rule. Now this code unit here is just called rule definition management and has functionality in it to open the rule page so that it can be edited. The init of the rule definitions is the only other thing that's interesting here. We're adding specific variables. Unlike the expression evaluator, we're not adding any kind of values. What we're doing is saying these are the variables that are going to be available for the user, and then the user is going to add whatever value they want to compare to. That would be similar to, using the quantity value in expression evaluator and then hard code it, comparing it against the value of 5. The more interesting part of this is, because these are pretty basic, we're also adding a text variable lookup specifically for the item category code. So what that means is if the user picks item category code, they can then choose which item categories it should be a part of. Right. Getting the rule header is not very interesting. We just insert it if we need it. Let's deploy this. Okay, and then we're just going to edit the rule on the first one. This one has a pretty basic rule. What you'll see is we just have a match all, we have a price, we have a quantity that we're comparing against, and if we're successful, we're just going to throw a message back to the user. Either all the conditions match or at least one failed, depending on success or failure. So when you're looking at this, you're always going to have one initial top level group, and in this case it's a match all. It could be match none, match any, or just ignore the results, and all of these serve a purpose, right? Ignore result might be really useful if you have a data set and you have 20 different rules and you want to run all the rules unconditionally because those individual rules decide whether or not they should apply anything. Match any is essentially an or, match none is a not anded, and a match all is an and. Now when you look at something like this and you're thinking like, I'm a developer, I understand how logic works in code, what does this really mean? You can go and view the logic as code. So now I can see, okay, the while true is basically, this is an if statement, the price is greater than or equal to 100, and the quantity is greater than 4, then we do something. So we're getting essentially a slimmed down AL code iteration, not really using real variables or symbols, just what those line conditions are. Now that's a pretty basic rule, but we can also build much more complicated rules. So in this case, what we've got is we've got an overall group that is a match any, so an or, and then we have subgroups where we have a match all and a match none. So what does it mean? This or basically says either this subgroup or this subgroup has to succeed, right? One true statement out of any. So if the price is less than 10,000 and the quantity is greater than or equal to 1, this group will be true. For false none, the item category can't be chair or desk. And then as a result, we just do at least one condition or no condition matched. And the important thing to keep in mind here is, like, again, we can review, but I will point out the more complicated nested the logic gets, the harder it will get to identify it at times, because this doesn't indent. So you have your overall if statement, and you have your first matching condition, and then your second matching condition, or the match none condition. Now what we're going to do is just build a rule from scratch. So I'm going to use example 5 here because I know example 5 doesn't have a rule associated yet. I'm going to hit edit, and what we'll see is we just get this default match all rule. That's our top level item, and from there we can add some conditions. Now it helps to have a little bit of forethought on how you want these conditions to operate. If you want like a match all at the top and then 2 or expressions underneath, or however those kind of conditions that you've got need to group together. But what you'll notice as well, there are ways to group and ungroup conditions. So if something happens to kind of go wrong, you can use that feature set to kind of change your grouping. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it at match all, and I'm just going to insert some conditions. I know I'm going to need 2, so I'll just insert those. I'll say discount equal 5 and quantity 34. What we've done is essentially said, hey, if discount and quantity match what we want, then everything is true. And if we go and review this as logic as code, because we know how to write this in AL, but what does this mean when we're configuring it, we can see how this kind of evaluates, right? So discount equals 5, quantity equals 34, and that's pretty much it. Now, how do we want to react to this when these matches happen, right? How do we want to do that stuff? Well, you can attach a condition true to any individual line. So I can say, hey, if this condition is true, I want to do something. If discount is true, I want to do something. If both of them are true, I want to do something. And all of them will execute as required, right? Now, maybe I say I want to actually complicate this a little bit. I want to say, okay, while I'm going to put an or here, I'm going to say, actually, this should be a match any in here. And if the item category is matches baseball, or I'm going to add another condition, or the item category matches baseball bat 01, that should be also true, right? Either of these categories are fine. Now, when I select these, you can see it lets me ungroup them and move them at the same level as the other discount and quantity, or I can move it back to stay in that grouping. Or I can move these down into the group and say, hey, actually, you know what? That should be part of that group. So like I was saying, if you kind of build your structure and it isn't quite what you wanted, you can change it, and you can use the individual lines to insert your conditions as well. So maybe Maybe you want to add, maybe you wanted these to be in their own group instead of being ANDed together. Who knows? But if you're not sure, again, you can view the logic as code and see how is this stuff actually being tied together. So first, the item category and the other item category is being ORed, and these ones are being ANDed, and it's being ANDed together with that condition. Right? Now, I was saying you might want a specific result set. So if I'm looking at this while true match all, I want some kind of rule action to happen. And what do you know? There's nothing to select. And the reason for that is because we haven't told the rule builder what is the user actually allowed to execute in our enum group. Because we can limit it to specific actions, add custom actions, or just give them the default set of actions. Whatever kind of works. So let's head back to the code and let's check out our next step. And what we're going to look at is none of the previous stuff, just what are we doing to add the rule action. So first off, as I was saying, we're making sure that we're in our application area. If it's not in our application area, we don't want to manipulate the actions because say they're using configurator and configurator determines what actions are available. We don't want to manipulate that. So in this case, we're just going to add the defaults that rule builder already comes with. So let's continue processing error message, run rule, and set value. I'll go over those a little bit more when we're back in Business Central. But all of those have built-in functionality. If we wanted to add a custom one, all we'd have to do is extend this enum with our custom value, and then use the event recorder, determine what event triggers when our custom rule action type is selected, and just subscribe to the event and actually handle it. That's it. If you've used configurator, you've seen configurator has some custom events. These rule action lookup types, this stuff is more or less boilerplate code, so we're not going to worry about it. In fact, we're not going to worry about rule editing at all anymore, because at this point then it's going to be done. So let's deploy this one. Run up the rule builder again. We'll go back to our previous example, edit the rule, and now we get to set what we want to happen. We can do a message, have it display whatever we want if it's successful. We can do failure conditions. We can also take conditions from here, copy to false, and it immediately just moves it over. Or you can do copy inverse to false. Now, copy inverse doesn't do anything for a message, right? Like there's nothing to do there. There's no inverse of a message. But some of these other rules, you can kind of copy the inverse if you need to. Actually, I'm just going to delete this one. And that's pretty much it. Now, like I was saying, we can have the condition on any line. So in this case, if everything matches, I'm going to do a hello word. If only any matches, and that's true, I'm just going to say none should have matched, right? So now I'm saying, okay, this match any, I'm actually using it as an error condition to stop the processing. So you can manipulate that as you would multiple if conditions within Business Central or within AL code. What you have to know about this is this uses standard lazy evaluation. If this executes and this match any returned a false statement, it's not going to bother executing the other ones unless you set it to continue processing. If you have it set to continue processing, now even if this is false, it will check discount. It won't check quantity if discount is false, but you can kind of make it, force it to check every single rule. Similarly, one of the other things you can do that's really cool to build up more complicated rules is actually build up rules that are small individual conditions you test, right? Similar to breaking up code. You can set up a rule that just checks discount conditions, one that just checks quantity conditions, one that checks description conditions, one that checks category descriptions. And then you can make a rule that runs all the other rules, right? In here, nothing is happening, but what if you made another rule that match all, or let's just say ignore results, and in that case, you're going to say run rule. And then you're going to say whatever rule you actually want to run in that case, like 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the rule IDs are. So the beauty there is that you can keep smaller, more manageable rules and say this is the one to calculate discounts, this is the one to calculate quantities, this is the one to calculate so-and-so, and this is the one to set the descriptions, right? So you can make very intricate rules and then have one rule that runs all of them. Now in the later example that we're going to do with sales signs, I'm going to do that through code, but either approach is completely valid. I'm doing it through code specifically because I want to show early exit conditions and I want to show how we're going to use the event subscriber in the case of set value. Now I'm going to exit this, and the next step that we have is essentially making this run rule do something. We haven't done anything with that yet. So let's go back and check out our next step. And then what we'll see is we've added a new variable, specifically the execution management. So the definition management, as the name kind of implies, is for the editing and viewing of rules. The execution management is actually running those rules. So there's some big differences here, big differences that are very similar. In this run rule context, which just gets triggered from the page, we're initializing the rule, and then we add the concrete values for a variable. In the example, we have one piece of data set tied to one rule, so it's always 1 to 1. But in practicality, you're likely using multiple rules onto a single data set, right? So what are we doing? We're saying all these variables that we previously defined that the user can choose from, we're going to go ahead and we're going to say, hey, the quantity is this, the price is this, the discount is this, the item category is this, and then we're going to evaluate that rule. That's it. Once we've got the rule evaluated, it's going to tell us if the rule was successfully validated or unsuccessful. In our case, if it's successful, we're saying, okay, the only thing we're ever allowing the user to set is discount. We're not letting it set any of the other variables. We're going to ignore them. You could go through and iterate all of them to see which ones were actually changed or what the values were. But we're just going to say only discount ever can be used in set value, and if they set anything else, we're going to ignore it. Now, this is one of the ways you can do that, but there is a better way through an event, and I'll go over that into the sales line example. So let's look at how we can essentially manipulate the values here. So in this rule, we've just got a user prompt, and in that user prompt, if they answer yes, we're going to increase the discount, and then we're going to tell them that we increased it. Right? If they click no, we're not doing anything. And we're enacting specifically on this user prompt, not on the top level. You would realistically act on any of them. We're acting on the specific prompt line. So if I go and I run this rule, right now we have a discount of 10. I say yes, now we've got 11. And obviously if I click no, nothing happens. If I click yes, again, it goes to 12. Now, just to show the expression evaluator a little bit more in work, you can make this a little bit more intricate. So say if discount is greater than 10, then we just want to leave it as a discount. Otherwise, we allow increasing it. Now, hopefully I've not made any typos in there, but we're already greater than 10. So if I run this rule now and I click yes, it'll tell us the discount increased, but actually it didn't, right? We can also make that message be conditional instead, but we're not going to worry about that here in this kind of like quick example. Now, we've seen how to build some rules. We've seen how to make some more complicated rules, how to run those rules. And in this data set, it's very easy because they're all one-to-one. When you're working off of the sales line, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Not that much more complicated, just a tiny little bit. So what we're going to do is add an action to the sales line, and from that action on the sales line, run some rules. So first things first, let's go and check out our next step, and then have a look at what are we doing here. The rule evaluation we don't need, that stays the same. But how are we going to run the rule with the sales lines? So as I was mentioning earlier, you can have a rule that runs different rules. What we're doing in this case, we're actually saying, okay, we're going to have a set of rules that are defined for the sales line. And instead of using a mega rule to run all your other rules, we're just going to say, okay, all these rules that fit into the category, we're going to run until we find a rule that matches. Now, maybe you want to ignore whether or not it matches and run all the rules every time. But in this case, we're kind of arguing that, okay, we're going to have a group of rules that works for discounts. And what we're going to do is, if we find a rule that matches for a discount, we're going to stop running. We're not going to execute the other rules. So the way I've done this here is, instead of adding a second enum groups for sales lines, I'm just saying, hey, I'm going to have this subgroup for sales lines. That's going to determine the line discounts. And as soon as we find anything that matches, we're going to exit, right? The rest of this code is exactly the same as the rule options, but just using the sales line record instead. So what do? We initialize the rule set. We set all of our variables based on the sales line. And then the only real difference here now is that instead of getting our variable buffer like we did in the first one, we're actually going to use the event. So we're just binding a subscription here so that when the rule ID gets evaluated, we manage how to execute that, right? So how does that work? In this code unit, we have a single event subscriber where we're validating that we're in our correct enum area, because we wouldn't want to handle anything for a different enum area. And then we're just getting our sales line. We just pass that along by using a singleton. And then we're just saying, hey, if the variable kind of gets updated on after set variable, and in our context, right, we're only allowing discounts to be updated, then we're going to update our discount line and set a modify. That's it. Pretty straightforward, very, very simple to kind of implement. But let's look at what that actually looks like. Go to Business Central, bring up our rule builder, again. Now first let's look at the actual rules. Like I said, I created a subcategory for these rules. So if I look at my rules, right now I'm only seeing the TechWorks ones. If I clear this filter, now I can see the two that we have for sales lines, right? If I view the rules, they're pretty simple. They're nothing crazy. This one has like a price less than 1,000, quantity greater than 2. The item category should be chair. And then if that's successful, it sets the discount. It uses the expression evaluator to determine if the discount should be set. And why is it doing that? Because if the sales agent already set a discount of, let's just say 20%, I don't want to change it down to 10. They've already been promised a certain discount. If no discount has been set, then I'm saying, yes, I'll change it. I'll give the customer a special discount because they fit the discount criteria. The other rule here is very similar, except the discount just gets set to a flat 15 if they match everything, right? Now, because we're running the rules one by one and we're exiting on the first match, if this one was to match, we would exit afterwards. If the second one was to match, we would exit after that, right? So the second one only gets executed if the first one fails. This is what I was saying earlier, where if you use the rule builder and you use continue processing, you can execute every rule, even if there was matches, because maybe this 15% match works, but really you want the 10% because it's less, and you're kind of working your way down or up. That's all kind of dependent on the business requirements and choices that they want to make. So let's look at this in action. Now, I have a special test order I put into the system just because I know at least one of these rules will match when I kind of run it. There's nothing special about this specific order, except you can see one of them already has a line discount. This one doesn't have a line discount, but has a very large price. So if I run the rules here, nothing happens. None of the rules matched. This is where using a master rule that runs all the sub rules would work out better, because I could say, hey, in the master rule, if I get no matching conditions, let's display a message. Now, if you're running this in a UI-less interface, then you wouldn't want to do that. But in a UI interface, that would be helpful for the end user, right? Now, if I check the second line and I run against sales line again, nothing's happening. And that's because I already have a line discount. It actually matches all the other conditions for our line. So let's just go in and remove our discount so that we can actually see it being set. So now we're going to run it, and immediately we're at 10, right? If I show this, and just to see that it didn't just set it back to 10 again, set that to a 5, and then run it, and see nothing happened. Now you could deepen that condition and say, hey, if it's actually less than 10, then I do want to set it to 10, but if it's over 10, then I don't want to set anything, right? So if I go back and I check this rule out again, I can see if the discount is equal to 0, we're doing something. But if I say, if the discount is less than 10, then I want it to be 10. Now I can say, okay, I've got this edited. Let's look at sales lines. 1025. Look at this second line again, scroll over. I've got my line discount, run this rule. Now I've updated it to 10. Why? Because it was less than 10, right? So that's how dynamic this can be through simple configuration. If you think about how you would do this in code, I'd have to edit the code, change that condition, redeploy it, have the user test it, do all of that acceptance testing. Now I can just change the configuration. Obviously, you're probably thinking like, well, determining prices and discounts, Business Central can already do that. And that's true. Business Central can do that. You can make it potentially a little bit more flexible by using the rule builder and adding it to that. But you should think about the application in other fields. So what about using it on productions? What about using it on assemblies? And right now I'm using this for numeric values, but what if you had an assembly that had a bunch of optional components, and if those optional components get used, you want the assembly description on the sales order to change? What if you're creating production orders and someone's going to produce 5 of something, and you say, you know what, if we're producing 5, it's actually better to produce 8. Let's change those values. What if you say you've got another production order that is creating, just 1 of something, and that's never worth the time because of resourcing, might as well create 2. Or you say, hey, if we're producing this item, we should produce as many as we can so that we have them on stock for the next orders. Or if you're not using any other kind of forecasting, you could potentially say that when someone finally creates the production order to create some goods, and forecast-wise that you're expecting to sell more of them in the next quarter, you could just also do some pre-reduction on that, right? So the rule builder really allows you a lot of flexibility there as far as how you want user inputs to affect how Business Central behaves. And the big flexibility is really that the end user, they only really need one power user that understands how to build the rules to then affect that input. If you go back to the knowledge base article that we linked for the rule builder, that's going to show you how that can work within the configurator. And that example of the configurator you can apply to any record within Business Central. I'm being very specific here. I'm applying it to sales line. But if you have some kind of logic that's going to apply to production lines, sales lines, heck, any record in Business Central, you probably already see, you could just use generic triggers for tables or the generic database triggers, and then run a case statement for whichever tables you want to elicit all of those changes. All without user interaction, just user configuration. All without rewriting your code, just by allowing them to configure all of that. Now, that is it for this. If you have any questions about Rule Builder, please feel free to visit our forums, post your questions. If you need some specific development support and you are a partner we actively engage with, please feel free to issue a support ticket so that one of our developers can assist you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content, and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.